Growing up, I learned from both my parents and from society about both who I couldn't be and, on the flip side, who I should be. Slowly building the walls inside my mind that would confine my life for over 20 years. The more you hear a message, whether directly or subliminally, the more you start to believe it. The more you start to internalize it as part of who you are. The more you start to place constraints on who you can be, the more you stop dreaming. When I think back to my younger self, I can't help but think about how much it would have meant to him to hear his own story out loud. A story that started out more pain than triumph. A story of a boy who was so focused on being someone else, on attaining that false sense of belonging, that he forgot to just be himself and lost his way in the dark. Growing up, you don't realize at first that you're different and other. After all, you're way too fixated on figuring out how to trim your armor in RuneScape or whether high-top Air Force Ones go with pastel cargo shorts. Hint, they don't. But this grace period quickly goes away as you get older. Your peers start to pull their eyes or ask if your family eats cats or dogs. You don't. Your family also doesn't make General Tso's chicken at home either. You don't know why they say or do these things, but all you know is that it hurts, and you can't find the words to explain why. You watch YouTubers like Kevjumba and Nigahiga, the only creators who look like you. You laugh at the jokes they make about Asian people, your people, and start making these jokes too, often at your own expense, to try and get people to laugh. Because when people laugh, they're your friends, right? And you're too focused on trying to make friends, to fit in, that you don't realize they're laughing at you and not with you. You're in high school when you hear that a white girl finds you attractive, and you legitimately don't believe it. Because all society has led you to believe is that you're the polar opposite. After all, the only times you've seen yourself depicted in the media, it's as the punchline of the joke, the disposable sidekick, the example of what a man isn't. Over time, you slowly start to resent the seemingly inescapable stereotypes that are constantly reinforced by society and the media. You slowly start to resent your heritage. You slowly start to resent yourself. So you start to do whatever you can to distance yourself from these stereotypes. You start playing contact sports and lifting weights so that you can say, I'm not like other Asians, in hopes that you can actually stop being Asian and everything associated with that part of your identity and just be Dennis. But in reality, all you're doing is running away from yourself, nurturing the seeds of inadequacy and unworthiness. You oil paint every Sunday at Chinese school, though you've stopped Chinese lessons a long time ago. It's the only time you feel like you can breathe, not choked by the crippling expectations of both your parents and society. You feel connected and disconnected at the same time, because after all, you're not like the other Asians. When you paint, you use the color white to make a much bolder color lighter. But the thing is, the essence of the original color always remains. You don't realize the significance of this until many years later. You start college, and for the first time in your life, are surrounded by way more people of color, including Asian Americans who are actually proud of their heritage. They model for you how to embrace and appreciate your heritage, and you slowly learn to do the same. You graduate college, and you start your first job in a predominantly white industry in a near exclusively white group. It's Chinese New Year, the most important day in your culture, and you're working because it's not a nationally recognized holiday in the US. You're on a call with your team and you're talking about how it's the year of the tiger when an associate joins and makes a remark about how she's reminded of the Survivor song, Eye of the Tiger. That's all she says. You're stunned and angry, but the words don't come out. Later that night, you wander the streets of Chinatown searching for some form of comfort and connection. You find both as you sit at a counter eating Chinese food alone. ignoring all the calls and emails that continue to bombard your phone. You and your Asian coworker, the only person in your group you felt you could trust and be your authentic self with, both quit 6 months in. During his exit interview, he talks about how he struggled with the lack of diversity in the group, to which that same associate who made the Eye of the Tiger remark, what does she say? She tells him he's going to have to deal with it throughout his career. The thing is, you already know this. In fact, you've been dealing with it your entire life. You've been dealing with it every day you wake up, look yourself in the mirror, and see your reflection staring back at you. Except there'll come a time when you're able to look yourself in the eyes without wishing you were white. A time when you'll be able to embrace all the parts that make you who you are. A time when there's no one else in the world you'd rather be. That time is now. When Shang Chi and the Legend of the Ten Rings came out last September, I saw it alone in a near-empty theater. Throughout the film, a range of emotions welled within me as I saw themes from my culture and my upbringing on screen for the first time in not just any movie, but a Marvel superhero movie. When I saw the scene with the grandmother living with the immediate family, I felt nostalgia as I was reminded of my own grandmother, my Nanai, who lived with us for many years and helped raise me.
Shang.
Shang. S-H-A-N-G. Shang.
Shang.
When Sean, as he's named in the movie, has his Chinese name mispronounced, I felt the secondhand frustration and embarrassment as I was reminded of all the times growing up when people would absolutely butcher my last name, or when people found out what my middle name was, which is actually just my Chinese name spelled out in how it's enunciated, and they would intentionally mispronounce it to try and be funny. By the way, quick intermission. My last name isn't pronounced Zhao, Zhao, or Yao, and my middle name, my Chinese name, isn't pronounced Bowen, and it's definitely not pronounced Bowen. 我的名字叫肖博文. But most importantly, throughout the film, I felt immense pride and frequently found myself holding back tears, just as I've learned to do my entire life. As the credits rolled, I was the last person in the theater, and I sat alone, taking the moment, the gravity of what I had just witnessed for not only myself, but for Asian American and colored kids everywhere, and bawled my eyes out. Because the media is so heavily skewed towards white culture, growing up, myself and many other Asian Americans didn't have many, if any, positive figures or representations we could look up to or try and model ourselves after. When a white boy watches a movie like Spider-Man or Captain America, watches sports like football or basketball, he can envision himself one day becoming his heroes. I only saw who I could never be. It's extremely difficult for kids to try and identify with someone who not only looks nothing like them, but also doesn't act like them, talk like them, or grow up like them. And ultimately, this raises the question, why exactly is positive representation so important? To answer this question, let's start by talking about cultivation theory. Cultivation theory is a framework developed by Professor George Gerbner that explains the lasting effects of media over time on people's perceptions of reality and the world around them, which in turn affects their attitudes and their behaviors. Essentially, the media people consume will reinforce any existing assumptions or beliefs they may have to the point that they begin to internalize any messaging and assumptions as their own reality. When we pair cultivation theory with the nature of early childhood brain development, we're left with an absolutely debilitating combo. During adolescence, children's brains are the most malleable and formative. As a result, any experiences or information children are exposed to will have an even greater impact on how they not only view the world and their place in it, but also how they view themselves and those around them. So when we think about it, the media not only introduces, but also reinforces representations of different groups of people. As a result, over time, children begin to associate themselves with the media's representation of a group of people that they identify with, which oftentimes can be both demeaning and restrictive.
My math specialist, look at him. You notice anything different about him? Look at his face. Look at his eyes.
Children begin to believe they are a certain way, should act in a certain manner, can only pursue a select few occupations, and so on, leading to not only identity and self-esteem issues, but oftentimes prejudice and biases towards other groups of people as well. For young children, being able to see themselves represented in the media shows them that they belong, that they matter, and that their stories are worthy and deserving of being told. That they are inherently enough by virtue of being their authentic selves, that they don't need to change who they are to simply be human. But representation itself isn't enough. Representation needs to be both positive and widespread to show children that they're capable of being anything they set out to be. That they're not only allowed to, but actively empowered to dream. As a 23-year-old Asian American, I'm beyond grateful to be at an age and have the awareness to both recognize and appreciate the magnitude of the ongoing shift and improvements in representation. Movies like Shang Chi and Everything Everywhere All at Once capture elements of the Asian American experience. Books like Crying in H Mart and Pachinko are bestsellers. Anime and K-drama are cool now. People all over the world fangirl and swoon over K-pop stars. Might I add, we have real-life superheroes like Simu Liu, Naomi Osaka, and Michelle Wu. While improvements in representation have been made across the board, not only among Asian Americans, the momentum can't stop. In fact, it starts with you. Each and every one of us has a unique blend of qualities that doesn't necessarily define who we are, but does contribute to our identity and ultimately shape how we experience the world. Whether it be heritage, gender, sexuality, whatever it may be, regardless, we all represent something. When you're able to embrace all the parts that contribute to making you who you uniquely are, embrace the notion that there's some kid out there who feels like they don't belong, feels like an other, who is looking for a superhero that they can see themselves in. A mantra that I've lived by for some time now, one that has guided me through all of life's ups and downs, is to be the person you look up to. And whether it's a singular person or a Frankenstein mishmash of a bunch of different people, I often and would encourage each and every one of you to pause the video and do the same, but try and reflect on the character, the values, and the actions of this person who you would look up to. As you navigate the uncertainty that is life, you may find yourself feeling lost, like you're floundering, like you're headed in the wrong direction. But so long as you keep working towards becoming the person who you yourself would look up to, you'll inevitably find your way in the dark. And in the process of doing so, light the way for someone else. So go out and start being that superhero. Not tomorrow, not next week, but today. You've got people waiting for you, and you're more than enough by virtue of being who you inherently are to rise to the occasion. And needless to say, I believe in each and every one of you.